If you have any questions or if you want to stop me at any time, feel free just to shout out and let me know. You can unmute yourself and talk if you so please, and we'll get moving forward with everything. We do a little pulse check here, and some of you guys put your schools in there as well, but let's just get it just for posterity's sake. We've got a poll. We'll just check what level you're roughly teaching at. So if you're junior high, elementary, junior high, high school, higher ed, let's pop up the poll. Oh. All right. Well, we're pretty split here. That's we're right down the middle here, so that'll be fine. So we got a couple of junior high, a couple high school, and even more split. Okay, so one elementary and one higher ed. So we'll hopefully all of this will work for everybody here. We're pretty much cut down the middle, but like I said, we'll do the best that we can here. So how many of you are active podcast listeners? So give a hand raise if you listen to podcasts, when you're on your walk in the morning, or I don't know if any of you drive anymore. I don't drive very much these days, but if you're an active podcast listener, go ahead and raise your hand. Okay, looks like most of you got some thumbs up and everything in there. And also in the chat, this is just for fun, but your favorite podcast for personal listening. And if you want to add a note on what it's about, like if you're into the true crime murder thing, or if you're into like political podcasts or education podcasts, whatever it is, throw in at least the name of your favorite podcast into the chat as well. Oh, cool. I'm seeing Radiolab, outstanding. This American Life, good. The Moth of Storytelling. Accidental Creative. Ryan, I don't think I've heard of the Accidental Creative. What is that?
It's an author, Todd Henry, all about systems building and productivity. It's nerdy
Awesome
stuff.
We got. I think you're hitting the right crowd here. Kevin Hart, This American Life, Ted Altucher, awesome. So we've got a good collection here. I would say that you're in the company of like-minded people. So if you are so inclined, you might want to take a note on a couple of those, and they might help you out or be interesting to you in the future. So let's get started. Well, before we actually start, I'm going to show you guys a little bit of what my students in my class were able to produce with no experience in podcasts, no experience in podcasting. Just so you know, I am at the community college level and I work with ESL. And so I was working with an adult ESL class, and I wanted to have them have some listening and speaking practice. And so I decided to use podcasts as kind of my medium for this. And so I'm going to show you here. I sent this out and I shared this online with other people here too. But what I was doing was collecting the different rounds of podcasts that they were doing. We were talking during this semester about eco living and being clean and all of those things. And I'll show you guys one example, not the whole thing, but maybe a minute or so of a podcast that some of my students made. So you can kind of get a sense of what you might come up with at the end. So I'll start off with this first one here, this eco-friendly straws. And if you guys remember that time in the world when what we were worried about was straws, the world we're not as worried about straws these days anymore, but it's still an interesting setup here. So let's listen to just the first minute of this that some of my students put together.
Hello and welcome to our eco-friendly podcast. My name is Emily. Here are my wonderful friends. Hi.
Hi, I'm Akiko.
Hi, I'm Janet.
Hi, I'm Helen.
And I am Zari.
We are adult ESL students of Irvine Valley College, and this is our first episode. Today, we are going to talk about eco-friendly alternatives to plastic straws.
One study published earlier this year estimated as many as 8.3 billion plastic straws pollute the world's beaches. 8 million tons of plastic flow into the ocean every year.
Within the past year,
Okay,
there
and this
have
goes on, and you can get the links inside of the notes here. So if you want to go look on that slide deck, and if you want to listen to more of that or kind of see what they were coming up with, you can. The important part for me here is sharing that this is what students were coming up with after mostly. I've never listened to a podcast. I've definitely never made a podcast, and doing some of the work that we'll be talking about here in just a moment. So let's start off with this. So we're going to share your podcast of choice, something that you think is good here. So I'm going to pop in the right one. I'm looking for student-friendly podcasts, and I'll put the link to this directly into the chat as well. So let's see here. You're welcome to share here. So what we're thinking about here is, do you know any student-friendly podcasts? And so this is not probably your I mean, I guess it depends on the level, but we're not really talking about shows that we enjoy for ourselves like we did in the introduction. Now we're kind of talking about student-friendly podcasts. So something that our students might listen to depending on the levels. And you can see inside of here, it asks a couple of basic questions. You can choose which ones you want to answer or don't want to answer, about how long it is and any comments that you might have on the show. I'll give you just a minute to fill that out. All right. And if you're still filling it out, that's fine. When you have time later, you can also open up the answer sheet. So there's some from the past that other people have shared in a previous version of this presentation, but the same thing, because we want to have a selection of podcasts that maybe you can use with your students. But we do have to ask the question about how we decide what podcasts we want our students to listen to. And then how do we give them, or when do we decide to give them autonomy and freedom of choice? So for me, of course, working with adults, I start very early with having them make their own free choices on everything. And maybe with younger students, like elementary school students or even junior high, you might choose to hold out on that a little bit and say, like, these are the ones that I want you to listen to. And you might scaffold around those a bit. It just depends on your level and your expectation, or as they're getting a little bit older and having a little bit more freedom in their choices, you might also start sharing with them podcasts that are on certain topics, or podcasts that are produced professionally. So you might give them a source like NPR or some of the ones that we were talking about, because they're going to start having options for, okay, well, I know that if it's NPR, it's pretty much safe. I'm not very worried about that. But they can also choose if they're interested in something like Planet Money or This American Life or whatever else it is. So I like to start building as soon as I can towards autonomy and freedom of choice, because here's the big thing with podcasts and listening to shows is that when students find something that they're really interested in, that's when they're going to listen to it, and that's when they're going to pursue that more. And so the more choice that you can give them there, the better opportunity they are going to have to chase that down and to be interested in what you're talking about, either individually or as a class. Okay, so let's continue moving forward. Oh, and by the way, on these slides, if you go click on this, you can access this later, or if you click on this little return button, that's the link to the responses. So if you're going to see, the people who are in the session, what they're sharing, you can go back and find their information here. So we want you all to have access to everything that people are putting in and that we're sharing here together. Okay, so let's continue. Now, the first thing I think that teachers tend to do when they're having students listen to podcasts, and especially if you're giving them freedom of choice, is doing something like a listening log. And listening logs are fine, they're great, they can serve a lot of purpose, but I think when students hear that they have to track their listening, it becomes a chore to them, right? And so we really want to do is we want to move that away from being a chore and turn that into an opportunity. Now there are different ways to do this, and I've come up with one way to do it, but I'm sure some of you can come up with other ways too. So let's take a look at my first idea here. Oops, let me see. I'm kind of losing my my links here. Just a moment. Okay, so mine is doing something like Pod Tank. So it's the same thing. There's not very different from actually doing a listening log here, but let's take a look at the difference. So I set this up for the students, and I say, you're a wealthy investor and you believe in the power of podcasting. As you listen to different podcasts, you need to make decisions about whether you would fund it and how much you would fund it for. So you basically, now they're becoming investors into podcasts and into this idea. And so you can give them the same basic things that you would give them for a listening log, right? What's a show? All of these things, links, when did you listen, all these things. But then you shift it up into something like, will you invest in this podcast? Yes or no? And they're going to have their choice, right? And then how much will you invest? Now, I created just these fake numbers. I said $1,000 supports a single episode, $50,000 supports a year of the show. And so they might choose how much they go, well, I want to hear a little bit more of this before I decide if I think it's worth a year, right? And so they can end up having that conversation. They can work in groups to decide on this together. You can if you're getting it super crazy, and I have not done this is just an idea in my head, but if you're getting super crazy, maybe you do something like if you're using Gimkit for other activities, and then you're getting points on Gimkit, and then they can use the points in their Gimkit as investment money on an activity like this. You could mix things up together to give them chances. And then the important part here for me is the reasoning, right? If you're not going to invest, please share why, right? If you will invest, what's the reason for the amount that you're going to invest? So now they're getting into their actual explanation of what they think about the show. Hopefully, depending again on levels, they might start understanding production quality, or they might start understanding how much work goes into actually creating that show, right? If it's just one person talking about, reviewing pizzas, that might not cost them very much money. But if it's like a serial type show where they're going out and doing massive investigations all across the country, that might cost more money. And so they would talk about what the reasoning for all of those things are. And then recommendation. So it says, regardless of your choice, it may be possible that someone else may like this show or want to invest in it. Who would you recommend it to and why? This can be a specific person or a type of person. So again, at my level, we might be talking about this, and I might say, if you know your classmates well, if we've done some community building, then they might want to pursue something and share it with their individual classmates, or they might say, oh, this is a really good for someone who is a business major. So again, at the college and recognizing college levels, or this might be good for someone who is going to, if you're at high school, you might say, hey, this is good for someone who's going to transfer to the East Coast, because there's a lot of East Coast stories going on here. However that might work, again, your creativity is the limit here, but the idea again is to get students involved and feel like they're responding to something that has some tangible results, rather than just filling in a listening log and getting 10 points for it, or whatever that might be. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do here is understanding the organization of your favorite show, right? Everything gets messy when people start listening to podcasts. They go, I don't know anything. I'm just listening to people talking. That's all. That's kind of the limit of what I understand, right? But what we would want to do is start saying, well, there are many different elements in a podcast, right? And they might be messy. They might not be totally clear as we look at them originally here on the screen. And we go, well, how do we organize that? How do we help our students recognize things like structure, things like, you know, what's going into this, how much work goes into it, how the show is actually broken down. And so I actually want to do this with you guys first. We're going to do a little quick chat waterfall. If you guys have done one of those before, the chat avalanche or the chat waterfall, which is where we write your answer for 1 minute, and then all at the same time we're going to hit enter and blast our answers all together into the chat box. So hold on to your answers here. Okay, I'm going to bring up my timer. And so we're going to do a 1 minute timer here, right? And then what I want you to do is I want you for 1 minute in your chat, and not hitting enter, but just getting set up in the chat. What do you think are the elements of a show? So how is a show structured? And you could do this with lots of different areas, but let's just talk about the structure of the show. So I might give, for example, to start, I might say introduction music, right? Introduction music starts off. Then what comes after that, and what comes after that, and after that. So I'm going to give 1 minute. I'll have you again. So we're going to try the waterfall thing where you don't hit enter until the 1 minute timer goes. So you're just going to type it into the chat and hold on to your enter button until the end. We're going to start for 1 minute now. Got 10 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2. Oh, the time went up. Time went up before I even recognized it. Okay, even if you're not done, just blast it into the chat. All right, cool. We got a lot of different things in here. Sorry, mine ended up taking all the space. Induction conflict. So Michelle's, then there's a blackout curtain. Next, the main character and supporting characters come in with a solution. There's rising actions, comedically try to solve them. Then there is a resolution. Finally, they solve it and applause, and they all laugh in the audience. All right, so Michelle, that's a seems a little specific. Is that a specific show or structure that you're talking about, or is that just a general every podcast you listen to?
Well, I was kind of thinking of Seinfeld, but maybe like not just podcast, but like that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So like the story structure, right? Like the general story structure there. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Okay, and that's great because you might want to do podcasts that are storytelling, right? And those are a great way too. So let's see what else we got here. Intro music. Let's see. Intro music. Topic preview mantra. Guided topic statement, history, content, and closing. All right, Lana, what do you mean by mantra here? Are you there with us, Lana? Lana, you might be muted.
Sorry about that. I lost my little. It was just like like some kind of saying that you always have in each of your podcasts. Like it's what do you call it? It would be like the logo, but verbal.
Yeah, I think that's right. Mantra then. So it's like the let's get to it, or if you listen to the daily, like I'm Michael Barbaro, see you tomorrow type of thing, right? Depending on where
Exactly,
it
the
fits.
Michael
Yeah.
Barbaro
Okay,
ending.
cool. Yeah, perfect. So then we've got other ones in here, you guys, that are great. Hook, structure, music setup, introduction of narrators, meat and bones, a cliffhanger. You can see mine, and again, there's no right or wrong answer. The whole point here is getting students to look at different ways that shows might be put together. So I usually say things like introduction music, and then the intro, and then who are the hosts and what's the show about, and maybe introducing the guests. And then we have segments, and maybe they're interviews, or maybe they're features, or maybe they're discussions. And then we have outros and the wrap up, right? So we've got different kind of versions of the same rough conversation here. Yeah. All sorts of different things that could be structured in different ways. But this is important for me in the class because I want the students to recognize that the shows that they've been listening to might not be structured in the same way as the shows that their classmates have been listening to. So they can, when they start doing an exercise like this and trying to figure out what goes into it, they might have a little bit of a different sense of what should be there or what shouldn't be there, or start to recognize that they're different from their classmates, which will be important as we move forward because they're going to want to recognize how ultimately they might structure their own shows. So then that's just the structure of the actual show. But then I would have the students deconstruct everything. So now you're going to say, hey, what's actually involved in making your favorite podcast? So if the show is 99% invisible, right? Is it just a guy sitting behind a microphone, or a girl sitting behind a microphone and talking, or is there other things happening with this, right? So this can end up being quite a long conversation as they start to recognize as they start to recognize all the different possibilities of what goes into the shows. Again, simpler ones, harder ones. Sometimes you'll hear the shows, if you listened earlier, if you were here at the beginning, we played that one and the students did sound effects of like pouring ice into the water, right? And so those sound effects were part of that. We talked about it, said, well, what makes it capture your attention, right? And it's kind of like a little hook, but it's connected. Audio sounds are connected into that, right? And so then they go, well, oh, actually I didn't just sit in front of the computer. I had to go and record that glass. I had to go into the kitchen and record it and set it up. And you go, well, okay, if we start looking at the more professional versions like NPR, then we start realizing, oh, well, they traveled and they had to, go rent cars, and depending on all these different levels of work, they might have had to work with quite a lot. And then we also ask students what it would take for them to make, before that, how many people are involved with the show, right? Is it just the one person? Is it you recording, editing, doing all the work? Or are other people involved in helping you out, right? And you might start introducing job things like what are producers and what are, what are editors and how do they do those different roles and why are they important, and maybe even introducing how much time it takes to do things like editing, right? And then finally, talking to the students and saying, well, what would it take for you to make a similar show? Because it's really easy for people to listen to a fancy podcast and go, I want to do something like This American Life. And you go, well, okay, that's a lot of work, right? That's a whole lot of work. And so we might want to start with easier levels and recognizing what we can do with smaller groups of people, 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, and then it becomes a whole company or a massive production later on. So that deconstruction then, as they start to understand what's going into it, then they would recognize what they might have to put into a similar type of setup. Okay, so here we go. Then at this point, we kind of flip the script. So students are going to start thinking creatively on a topic that they care about or they want to talk about. And again, for me, I am actually, if this is elementary, junior high, high school, or higher ed, I don't really care. Like, to me, this would be really important to make this something that they care about. Now they can go dig in and they can find something that is like a subtopic on a bigger theme that you might be working on. So for example, in my class right now, my whole class decided on the unit topic of travel, right? That was a little sad because I'm like, we are not traveling, but if you want to talk about traveling, that's fine. But they said, hey, we want to do traveling. So, okay. So we're going to talk about traveling, but every group inside of my class is going to say, hey, how are we going to break down these ideas of traveling? What do you want to talk about with traveling? So one group maybe decided to do something like, I want to talk about Alaskan cruises. Okay, well, Alaskan cruise is going to fit into that idea. Another group might say how to find the cheapest airfares online. Okay, and then they're going to do a whole different thing. So in that broad category of travel, then they still have their student choice to be able to figure out what they're interested in and move it in the direction that is useful and valuable to them. So again, for me in an ESL class, and again, it's going to depend on your content areas, but for me as an ESL class, I might say, okay, well, what are the vocabulary words that you need to know to be able to talk about these things, right? And then they go out and find other resources and they say, well, these words kept coming up again. And so I'm going to use these words inside of my recording here. Or, you know, they talked about these types of ideas. I might even be able to figure out ways to link specific grammar into it. What I'm doing in my class is I give the whole class a set grammar form, and then I say I want you to use this 2 or 3 times in your recording at the end, regardless of what you end up choosing for your topic. And so they can end up using those as creative constraints that have to help them get their ideas sorted. So let's go take a look at this. There are lots and lots and lots of different ways that you can get creative with podcast ideas. So like, what do they want to do? And I'm going to pop this into the chat for you guys as well if you want to add your own ideas. Here are some that I have added. And actually this is also from previous attendees of this presentation. So a few different ones, but let's take a look here. So I put in a couple of topics here: ELA, math, social studies, science, and other. So if you want to add an idea for something that might fit into these categories, please feel free to go ahead and click the plus at the bottom and you can add. But here are the ideas that I kind of came up with. So if I were doing ELA, I might do something like, I called it Vero, no, you didn't. And so it's a gossip podcast where the hosts are outsiders talking about Verona's latest scandals, including the story everybody's been talking about, the secret dating of the kids from the Capulets and the Montagues, right? So you might say, hey, what's a different way of looking at the Romeo and Juliet story, right? And if we say, hey, back then, of course, it was its own thing, but now if we talk about, like, you know, gossip bloggers and, you know, all of those types of things, then what would people maybe have said around there? Everyday math. So a show where the hosts explain the math that went into the products that they use every day, from wall screws to video games. There's math everywhere, every day. So people could just grab any item and say, what is the math behind this item, and try to talk it through and figure it out. With social studies, I did the uncovered recordings of Mary Todd Lincoln. And I said, a time portal about the size of a shoebox was discovered and students put an audio recorder in it. The next morning, the recorder was back and full of recordings from Mrs. Mary Todd Lincoln talking about her life as the first lady. So then they might say, hey, we're going to act out this kind of fake thing where we're Mary Todd Lincoln, maybe the other people who are walking in and out of life, we can hear what's going on. What does that life sound like to them? And again, thinking carefully, the students would have to show an understanding of what the world was like at those times, right? So they would have to be able to know some of the politics or some of the thinking behind Lincoln and all of those things. Science here, crossbreeding problems. What would it really be like if you could successfully combine a frog with a horse? So I said, this show considers the far out implications of what might happen when we mix very different animals. So we see these things online where it's like a cute picture of like a frog frog and a horse, but if we actually blended that DNA, then we might have a different problem, right? And so it would be interesting for students to go in a science class and really show, hey, I understand, what the habits of these animals are. And so if I put them into an environment that is not good for one or different type of them, if frogs were suddenly 200 or 500 pounds or whatever it is, or if they had long legs but they still had long tongues, I don't know, all those things. And then also PE, interviews from the top. This show interviews student athletes who currently hold records. The host breaks down what makes their interviewee successful and how they got where they were. So again, all sorts of different possible topics. I'm going to give you guys a minute just to throw in, if you think you have another idea. It's not that anyone has to do these things. It's about thinking creatively and saying, well, what can we possibly do? What might be fun, right? What might be a way to engage? Because if you can come up with a couple ideas, then of course you can feed, the concept of the creativity to your students and give them some chance to kind of recognize how big they can go with some of these possible topics, and that they can record and talk in any class subject. So I'll give you just a minute if you want to add anything, or if you think you got an idea that might work here. I see someone put in breaking math. What would breaking math maybe be? I'm not sure who added that, but if you want to unmute yourself and share.
I added that, Karen.
Karen.
Breaking math is like everyday math related to real world, and it's kind of interesting because they're going off of Breaking Bad. They kind of make math a little bit more intriguing and mystery, but it's based on daily math use.
Cool, yeah. Is that a show that already exists, or is that just one you're kind of thinking of?
Oh no, that already exists. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Perfect. Well, the nice thing about shows that already exist too is that you can just take that format and apply it to like what you're talking about in your class, right? So it's great when you find good structures and you can just use that and apply it to the topics you're working on. Michelle's adding there compound words. What if they were animals that really existed? Catfish or butterfly, right? Okay, so there's some fun vocabulary possibly there. My so-called dystopian life. After reading dystopian novels, students can take on the characters or create new characters. Yeah, that would be so cool. Like to hear people talking about what actual daily life is like, right? Sometimes they kind of see it in the story, but they don't really consider fully what it might be living inside of there. Grammar possibilities, retelling a sequel, adding a sequel story, similar to the story of the three little pigs, the true story of the three little pigs. That's the one where the pigs are kind of the bullies and the wolf is kind of the good guy, I think, if I remember that correctly. Current events, crazy archaic laws. Yeah, I used to love that stuff when I was a kid. Like why does this law exist? Daily discoveries, lab reports, steam makers. Yeah, so I think you guys are starting to see here. Feel free to add later if you like. There's plenty of ideas here, but once you start thinking about it, then you go, oh, there's so many things, so many different ways that we could record and talk about these ideas. And then also, to me, these are like these end up being projects that really show students thinking and really shows their understanding for what they're working on. So to me, that's really important because I want to be able to see like how they process the information rather than just multiple choicing and, hey, here's the answer A, B, C right down the line, right? So lots of ways to assess here, lots of ways to ask students to show their understanding. I love all of this. Okay, so Moving forward, then you get groups to decide together. So here I've got, say we've got some different ideas, all of the, what are we coming up with? And then we put them in groups. Well, one, they have to decide, they have to come up together. So there is that creative constraint area here with say, hey, you're going to have to work with a couple of people. You're going to work on this project, figure it out. Usually for me, a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, and then we're going to change topics. So if a student says, hey, I don't like this topic, I don't want to talk about it, I go, hey, don't worry, you'll be changing in 2 more weeks. Just bear with it. Next time you'll get control over it and you can choose that topic as well. But also making sure that everybody has a voice, right? So you might want to work out their roles and make sure that they understand, hey, I don't want anyone just being the producer in the background, although that can be in the future. But at least to start, I want to hear everybody's voice in here. I want to make sure that everybody's equally going forward. Roz, I'll try and move a little quickly so I can share with that. That is part of it, but only very briefly. Scripting. So after this, then we're talking about scripting, right? Setting up, like, what are you going to say? Here's the thing. We always feel like scripting is stilted, right? It's like, hey, hello. Today we are going to talk about the history of World War II. And it's like, well, all right. So we need to work on that. But what can happen is the script can make people feel more comfortable to start. Most podcasters that I know started with scripting and then learned to move away from it, right? Just like presentations, right? We're looking at those 3x5 cards when we're starting off, and then we're like, okay, I'm a little bit more comfortable. Maybe I can just do, bullet points, or maybe I can just get into rough ideas as we're moving forward. So I am actually really happy when my students script at the beginning, because then we can talk it through. We can see what's going on with their language, how they're presenting information. I can make corrections before they record, because one big thing that does happen is they go, well, I recorded all of this stuff and now you're telling me it's a problem. It's like, well, sorry, right? I want them to feel comfortable and that they're going to feel supported in the whole process for that. So that scripting can be a good part, and then they can work through together definitely what they want to say for each of them. I also do a focus on discrete skills. So again, for me, with ESL students, I'm talking about specific language. I'm talking about, vocabulary. If they have scripted, then it's really easy for me to see that they've put it in. I will give a fair warning. It disappears to me when I'm just listening, because I just want to hear that content and I get involved with their stories. But when I can see it on the scripting, then I can say, okay, you are definitely using this form, whether that be, a grammatical form or a vocabulary or some sort of structure, whatever it is that I'm looking for. So you can make sure that whatever it is you're talking about can go in there. Okay, so then practicing speaking before recording. So this one is a big one. I do have them go through several times if possible. Hey, practice this through. Make sure you feel comfortable. Make sure you know all of these words and how to pronounce them properly, right? Those are all areas that, that I want my students to feel that they know what they're doing. A lot of times with ESL, they'll look up words for the first time and have no idea really what the word is or the context of it. And there's like, I'm just going to try and use it. And it's like, well, okay, but let's make sure at least that you can pronounce it. And then again, you can give them techniques to go home, learn how to pronounce it, practice saying it, listen to it smoothly on things like Youglish or whatever it is. Okay, so recording. Roz, this is, I'll try and get this. You can talk it. If you have any questions, please feel free to shout out. But number one, Anchor. Anchor is the way to record. It's free. There's, it's all pretty straightforward. You can do it right in your phone. You don't have to worry about anything. And in the phone now, they also have an option to do it with friends. So you tap on a button and then it says, here is the link, and you can invite your classmates in, I think up to 4 people or something like that. The one thing I don't like about Anchor in online teaching is, for some reason, that feature does not exist on the computer. And so it's really frustrating when we're in a Zoom meeting or whatever, and one student's got it set up on their phone, and then they're like, well, how do I get the link to other people? And you can text message if you're comfortable giving your phone number out, but not always comfortable with that. So, so they're, it's just not as smooth. I wish that they would just give you a really clear code and say, type in this code, and then you can go into an open meeting. That's what they should do. But anyways, other than that, Anchor is really great. It's got everything built in. You can record in segments. You can chop it up. Students can rearrange parts. There's sound effects. You can bring in music from Spotify. So if they want to have background music, all of those types of things. And then there's other ways too. They can record in Zoom, right? In a Zoom now, students can go into breakout rooms and they can actually record down to their computer. So if they just want to talk with each other, use the Zoom recording, pull it down to their computer, and if they can edit from there, that's great. There's also 123apps.com, which offers a lot of different editing possibilities. There's many different things out there. It kind of depends on what you have access to at your school, what you what you are okay, what your level of your students are, and what they're allowed to sign up for. So some of those things you might need to search and make sure that they're okay for, elementary school or whatever it is. And sorry, again, in higher ed, I just don't worry about any of those things. I'm just like, just go log into everything. And so I have a little bit of freedom there that other people might not. Okay, so they've got it recorded inside of Anchor. That they can publish, right? And I want them to publish and distribute publicly. This is a big deal. It is very important for me that my students have their podcasts out there and published in the world. Not that it's a private MP3 that they're going to email me, because there's no skin on the line with that. It's just like, just for the teacher, whatever. When they know that someone's going to be out there, or that I might be sharing it with, teachers on Twitter or whatever it is, then they go, oh, hold on a second. I need to put in that little extra work. I need to put in that little extra effort to make sure that this is the quality that I'd feel comfortable with someone listening to. Now, I don't have them share their names or anything. They can share their first name and that's enough. But when it's distributed publicly, there's more accountability for the students. Now, going back here, Roz said, well, how do they share it with you? Right here, once they publish on Anchor, then there's a URL, and they can share that URL directly to me however I want to collect it. So I collect it in Canvas because Canvas is our LMS, but they can email it to you. You can put it, I think, in Google Classroom. You can send in links as well. So, so any way that you like, just as soon as that URL is available, they can share it. And then, like I said, my secret is when I can, not every time, but I will sometimes share it out with, teachers on Twitter, and then try and get those teachers to come and give feedback or say things. And especially if I get it on Twitter, because then I'll blast that up on screen and I'll say, hey, this is a teacher, I might say, here's Roz, and Roz responded and listened to your show. This is what she had to say about it. I'm usually asking for positive feedback because they're trying so hard, but yeah. Michelle, yes, that is your Anchor. Yeah. Is there a question, or you're just showing it to share? Awesome, thank you. Yeah, that's Anchor. Anchor went through a massive redesign and rebranding recently, and for some reason they decided that the new logo is worth spending more money on than functionality of using it on the computer. I don't know why. All right, so last part is recycling the content. So like I said here, I save all of these, right? As many of these as I can. If a student wants to delete it later, okay, there's nothing I can do about that. That's up to them. But I do like to save and recycle so that I can show that to future students, or I can use their recordings as content level work for another project. So if I'm saying, hey, let's talk about recycling and what the value of it is. One of your homework assignments is to go listen to this podcast that students just like you made 6 months ago. who didn't, you know, like you're talking about like real people that are right on campus and they have a chance to go, oh, wait a second, this is not some abstract thing from some far away place. This is something that people like me are capable of doing. And then they feel more confident to be able to do it. Sometimes they find those people and they talk to them and say, like, you know, they can reach out and get, you know, some relationships going on there. So keeping all of that content for recycling and for use in different cycles or sharing to lower level students, depending on what's going on, all of these things are possibilities. And you can kind of go on endlessly with this if you could just keep that loop alive. So that is it. I'll stick around, of course, for a few minutes. I think we're supposed to go until 3, so I think pretty close on time here. Just in case I wasn't clear about this, my name is Brent Warner. If you're interested in EdTech and ESL, I do a podcast on that called Diesel, the Diesel Digital Integration in English as a Second or Other Language. And if you're interested in higher ed, I do a podcast on that called the Higher Ed Tech Podcast. Thank you guys so much. You can unmute yourselves or you can shout out if you have anything that you'd like to share. I hope that some of this is useful for you. Yeah, Michelle, it is user friendly once you get into it, for sure. It's just that one feature that they're killing me with not putting on the website version. But if you can do it on your phone, most of the students are able to figure it out.